From Sarasota, Florida, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Wednesday in February, the very first day of Orioles spring training media availability. We got our eyes and ears down at the Ed Smith Stadium complex to witness and to listen to the Orioles' very first day of Orioles spring training that we were able to. We're going to talk about everything that we saw, everything that we heard today. We're going to talk about the state of the Orioles rotation, whether they have enough, whether they should add more, even as they report to spring training. But first, John, this is a re-record. All cards on the table here. We did do a podcast from Ed Smith Stadium a couple hours ago. The internet was just terrible. Everybody was commenting on us, just dunking on us. We are trying this again on X, Facebook, and YouTube. We are back at our respective abodes. But in order to give everybody a taste of summer weather as they freeze their butts off back in Baltimore or wherever, I have arranged a little looped video of the stadium from earlier today so that they can get the view of Ed Smith Stadium and the beautiful weather while also listening to us. So they get the best of both worlds.
That's great. And honestly, if you get this view and none of the content from the 25 minutes that we were talking to each other 2 hours ago, that's probably a good deal for everyone involved.
Yes, that was a little bit of a rushed podcast. It was not our best work. We were under tight circumstances. The table we were working on was incredibly dirty. That somehow played a factor into our performance. I'm not sure, but I'm just making excuses at this point.
I also do something on the first day of spring training every year where it's just the part where I need to feed myself just completely escapes my mind. So I wasn't unfed at the moment we spoke, but I think I still had a little hanger, and
totally understandable.
We're back. We're back.
You also got in at 10 o'clock last night and slept on the couch. So, I think it's understandable. Well, let's talk about the Orioles showing up to spring training, because not all of them showed up in the best shape of their lives, in perfect tip-top shape. A couple guys are injured. It is tradition that Mike Elias kicks off spring training with his first media availability and alerts us to the fact that several guys are not reporting to camp fully healthy. It is an unfortunate tradition, but it is one that continues this year. Not the worst of circumstances. We've had bad years before. I think of 2024 where Mike Elias gets up and says Kyle Bradish is hurt and Tyler Wells is hurt and 4 other guys at that point were hurt. Nothing that dire. However, still not great. We're going to talk about Jackson Holliday, Jordan Westburg, Colin Selby, 3 guys landing on the injured list, or at least one of them will land on the injured list to start the season. John, not ideal that Jackson Holliday, the Orioles' second baseman, has suffered a fracture to the hamate bone in his right hand. The hamate bone is on the palm, closer to the wrist. Nothing traumatic from what we understand. It was not like he got hit by a pitch or anything. This is an injury that can occur commonly, especially in hitters. So common, in fact, that we've seen 3 announced today. Corbin Carroll, Francisco Lindor, and Jackson Holliday all having surgery to remove the hamate bone in their hand. Very unfortunate that Jackson Holliday has this happen a few days ago. It means that he will be out for opening day and then at least a couple weeks after that. So the Orioles will be without their second baseman to start the season. Should also talk about Jordan Westburg, who suffered an oblique strain 3 weeks ago. But according to Mike Elias, he has turned the corner. He's not expected to miss any regular season time, but is likely to miss the first few games of Grapefruit League action. And then Colin Selby, battling shoulder inflammation for much of the offseason, not expected to be ready for opening day. So that changes the calculus in the Orioles bullpen. But obviously, John, the biggest, most impactful injury here is Jackson Holliday, and it's just a bummer for a guy that we are all expecting big things from in 2026.
Yeah, and Jackson Holliday is in a unique place in his career. Obviously, he was one of the rare guys who survived all of last year. So naturally, the universe comes for him in terms of having an injury early in the spring of 2026. What strikes me more about this injury is not necessarily the what do they do going forward, and I know we'll get to that, but this is an injury that you can physically recover well enough to play from, but it impacts hitters and their ability to hit the ball hard and drive the ball and make solid contact for a while. You can basically go through the list of players that have had this injury, and whatever season that happens in, even when they come back, they're not necessarily the same. So for somebody who is trying to maximize his power as much as Jackson Holliday is, and trying to blend that hard contact skill set with the you know elite strike zone discipline that he showed coming up, it's going to make a difference in how he produces this year. I mean, there's a world where he can, kind of focus on getting on base and being more of a table setter when he comes back. But it's going to be hard for him to. He was somebody, I believe, he led the Orioles in home runs last year, or was
Yeah,
tied with
tied for the lead.
Peterson for that honor. Um, a lot of things had to happen for that to be the case that didn't involve Jackson Holliday. This is a thing that is happening that doesn't involve Jackson Holliday that I believe will significantly lessen the chances of that happening again. Um, but it's an injury that he can come back and play from, and I think he provides such value, defensively, and can, if he kind of embraces that table setter role and tries to be an on base machine. It will allow him to make an impact when he does return to the team, but it's something that is going to be, I feel like it's going to be obvious watching that he had this injury for the rest of the season.
And that's a huge bummer, because we saw just how much the injury that Gunnar Henderson suffered early in the season affected his play, and he didn't really detail it until after the season ended that he was dealing with issues that affected his swing path, and it bore itself out in the numbers. I mean, there is a logical line you could draw from the injury that he was going through in 2025 to his dip in power. I mean, there's a reason Jackson Holliday tied for the league lead, for the team lead in home runs last year, and it's because Gunnar Henderson's power took a massive step back. So if this is something that affects Jackson Holliday throughout the season, not just at the start of the season, that could have serious implications for the Orioles long term. Short term, how are they going to fill his spot? Mike Elias said he feels good about the options that they already have in-house. It helps that they just acquired Blaze Alexander in a deal in which they send three players to the Arizona Diamondbacks and get the utility man. And if you're wondering if Jackson Holliday's injury pushed Mike Elias to make this trade with the Arizona Diamondbacks, he pointed out that the trade occurred the day before Jackson Holliday had his injury. So it's not like the Orioles scrambled and said, we have to go get Blaze Alexander because Holliday's out. But I think that it's possible that the Orioles saw the injury to Jordan Westburg, looked at Jordan Westburg's injury history over the past couple of years and said, you know what? We need to go out and shore up our infield. Jeremiah Jackson is nice insurance, but we need somebody who can play multiple spots and can play solid defense at multiple spots in the infield. So awfully nice to have the 26-year-old Blaze Alexander in-house when something like this occurs.
Yeah, and I think the Blaze Alexander acquisition is something, going back to something topic we talked about last month, that this team probably still does not have a ton of high minors, major league quality depth options other than what are on their roster. So as you're kind of stress testing the 40-man, stress testing the 26-man roster and saying, okay, what happens if this happens? The answer for basically what has happened pre this trade in terms of an infielder going down and the Orioles needing to shuffle things around there was a large gap between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And I think this was meant to kind of cushion that. I don't think they expected to fall back on that cushion so quickly, but there's certainly value to having that. I think back to I am a believer of the idea that the Corbin Burns trade happened because of Kyle Bradish's injury, and those two things were related, and you can never tell me differently.
Yeah.
It is knowable. We don't specifically know exactly what day, Jackson Holliday's injury happened and Michael Elias is telling it was the day after this trade, and that's going to be the story. But it feels like they're a little different in terms of timelines, obviously, this time.
Yeah. And in terms of the overall roster construction here, this changes the calculus a little bit, because we've been planning all offseason for Jeremiah Jackson to be the utility infielder or utility man, period. And then Blaze Alexander enters the picture, and now you're starting to say, all right, how are all these guys going to fit on the roster, especially because the Orioles have 3 right-handed hitting first basemen that are all in camp. Pretty amazing that we've gotten to this point, and they still have Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo on the roster at spring training, along with Pete Alonso. And we thought this is an area for sure that the Orioles will deal from. Those 2 guys, whether it be Mountcastle, Mayo, or both of them, will find their way onto another roster. Right now, the Orioles might be patting themselves on the back just a little bit because they kept Kobe Mayo. Kobe Mayo is not an ideal third baseman, but he can play there. He's done it at the big league level. He's not superb defensively. He's probably not going to win any gold gloves over there, but he can play third base. And he is a right-handed hitter who can step right in and fill that spot. So I don't imagine that it's going to be all Blaze Alexander at second base. I think we could see Jordan Westberg move over from third base to second base. We could see Blaze Alexander play third base. And this probably increases the chances that Kobe Mayo makes the opening day roster, because if Westberg moves from third to second, you can stick Mayo at third.
Yeah, I think Jeremiah Jackson also has a case to play third base there. I guess the point is that the Orioles are not totally hamstrung by this happening. There are a lot of ways they can get to the roster they want to. You can have guys go up and down based on matchups. Michael Elias had mentioned that there was a chance that there would be a second base candidate who's not in the organization right now. There's not an incredibly appealing list of second base type free agents left out there, but you could do that. We could be running back hey, there's Tony Kemp.
I was just gonna say, if they bring back Tony Kemp, did he officially retire yet?
I'm not sure there was somebody else in that spring training too, Colton Wong, maybe, who was kind of like kicking around. Those guys exist. Those guys specifically exist, but also those types of guys more plentifully exist.
What's Adam Frazier up to?
He is probably doing something. I don't know exactly what, but I have not kept up on the Adam Frazier business.
He had 1.4 WAR last year between the Pirates and Royals. So hey, give him a call.
Sign it up.
Sign him up. Yeah, I mean, if this increases the chances that Kobe Mayo makes the roster, that would be great for him, because the idea of sending Kobe Mayo back down to AAA after how he ended the season would be just difficult. And even from a human perspective, we're watching the Orioles sign Pete Alonso and not trade Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo and thinking, can somebody give Kobe Mayo an opportunity? Because he could start for a lot of teams, either at first base or third base. I mean, there are a lot of teams that would love his services. And so if he is able to break camp, if he's not dealt and if he's able to break camp with the roster, that would certainly help. But right now I'm looking at 4 spots for 6 guys, if I've done my roster math correctly. Those 6 guys are Jeremiah Jackson, Dylan Beavers, Leody Taveras, Ryan Mountcastle, Kobe Mayo, and Heston Kjerstad. We're assuming that Blaze Alexander is making this team because he's out of options and the Orioles just traded 3 guys for him. Those 6 guys for 4 spots, who do you think makes the team in 5 or 6 weeks?
So I think the operating logic is always that you keep the guys that have options. You option the guys that have options and keep the guys that don't, because you want to keep as much talent in your organization and as many players you like in your organization as possible.
Yep.
I would say that if I had to choose between Kobe Mayo and Jeremiah Jackson for the extra infielder spot, I'd probably pick Kobe Mayo. Ryan Mountcastle obviously in, Dylan Beavers in, Leody Taveras in, and that would put Jeremiah Jackson, Heston Kjerstad in Norfolk as depth, and that's unfortunate for them, but fortunate for the Orioles to have that. I think this type of thing happening broadly, I don't think there's going to be any world where, Ryan Mountcastle is not, motivated. None of these players are going to be unmotivated, but I think the machinations around this and all the ways that somebody could be on the roster or potentially could not be on the roster, it really is a good thing for Trey Albernaz. It's a good thing for all these players, because some of these players were showing up to camp not knowing what their role was going to be, if they were going to have a role, knowing that it was going to be an uphill battle to have a role, period. And some of them aren't exactly linear. I am here on February 11th, and when the team goes north in a month and a half, I'm going to be the everyday whatever. Some of these things don't necessarily track directly, but there is more of an opportunity for somebody to just have a really good spring and make it make the conversation. Well, why would we not bring this guy rather than why would we? And I think that's what the Orioles are seeking, and it's probably not unreasonable to expect that one or two guys will have that kind of camp.
Yeah, and it's highly possible that Heston Kjerstad mashes in spring training in Grapefruit League games the way that he has done in the past and forces the Orioles' hand in some kind of way. Seeing him back out there on the backfields throwing the ball was certainly a sight for sore eyes. He missed the whole second half of last season. Obviously, his stint in the big leagues didn't go particularly well. He's just kind of a wild card at this point. The Orioles shouldn't expect anything, aren't expecting anything from him. But if he pops during spring training, that would be a nice development too. And Ryan Mountcastle, showed up to spring training knowing that it's a highly possible he gets traded. He has that, he comes to terms with the Orioles in the final year of under team control, and they add that team option to the end of his deal. That's always a nice incentive if he is traded for a team to go and pick him up. Colin Selby goes down. The Orioles could have room in their bullpen. Maybe it's a Ryan Mountcastle for a reliever trade. He knows that he has to just show up and do his job. It's difficult for guys like Mountcastle and Mayo to block out the trade talk. But ultimately, if they are good citizens, if they show up, if they play well in spring training, there's a chance they get dealt to another team and they're starting every day for another organization.
Yeah, those opportunities are there. This is not a time to be, it's confusing for people on the outside to try to figure it out. If you're in that world and you're looking around a clubhouse with 60 some guys in it and trying to figure out where you fit in, you're probably not going to have the best time at that. There's plenty these guys can do other than think about these types of things. And I imagine they're all pretty their own understanding of their situation is probably a little clearer than it was when they showed up.
Yeah, and they've had all offseason to come to terms with this. Pete Alonso was signed in December, a couple of weeks after the winter meeting. So Mountcastle and Mayo knew that this was a possibility all along. All right, let's turn our attention to the pitching side. Let's turn our attention to the rotation. Kyle Goon wrote a column on thebanner.com where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months that came out today about how the Orioles keep talking big game about the opportunities and the resources at their disposal. With David Rubenstein, this new ownership group, Mike Elias has said, we have a whole new world available to us. And yet the payroll is projected to be around where it was last year, despite the fact that they signed Pete Alonso to a $155 million deal. And Mike Elias has said all offseason, just like he did last year, that they are hunting for arms. They are hunting for guys who can fit into the top end of this rotation, and they haven't gotten that guy. Framber Valdez is off the board. He signs with the Detroit Tigers. Dylan Cease went early in the offseason. He signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. There aren't many options out there if you're looking for top end of the rotation guys, both on the trade market and in free agency. The only two guys left in free agency who could fit into the Orioles rotation in theory right now are Chris Bassett and Zach Gallen. John, where do you fall on how the Orioles rotation stands right now? Do you think that the Baltimore Orioles have done enough to upgrade their rotation this winter?
Done enough to upgrade their rotation? Yes. What would their rotation be if they didn't trade for Shane Baz and sign Zach Eflin? It would not be that great. I think that, and I'll reiterate this, it feels like the bottom of the rotation is the issue. The part where you are one dead arm away from having a Brandon Young, Tyler Wells, Cade Povich, Albert Suarez competition for the fifth rotation spot. That's tricky to me. That's not to say none of those guys can do it. I think Tyler Wells has demonstrated that he can do it in stretches when he's healthy. I think the pursuit of those arms has taken on not a life of its own, but we are still talking about an Orioles team that has a lot of guiding lights other than we have the money, let's go spend it. They kind of did that with Pete Alonso. That feels like it's more knowable in terms of hitter aging curves. Sluggers fall off when they fall off, but they felt good about what that would mean near term. it feels really complicated to say, not having done the one thing that most teams are already kind of hesitant to do, which is to sign free agent pitchers like on the other side of 30 to long-term deals. That having not done that is some kind of indictment. I I made a fantastic life for myself just mincing Mike Elias's words and picking them out of context and saying and I it's a fantastic business. Mike Elias said, even in the same sentence, he wants a top, like front of the rotation, top end, top half in the same sentence. So where you slot Shane Baz into that is kind of where you stand on where they ended up in terms of accomplishing that. I think there's a world where Shane Baz can be that guy. I think it's a risky world to say that he's going to be that guy. And after they made that trade, he also said that they had targets to add a big bat and a closer and one starting pitcher, and they've checked all those boxes, and now they'll still look for other things. So we said a lot of things. I think that there's one team in baseball that actually has unlimited resources, and it's the Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Baltimore Orioles are not in that category. So unless you're going to act like the one team that actually does have that, you probably shouldn't present yourself as such. And to, I guess, wrap up this thought, which has been several thoughts and not necessarily the most coherent, there's a lot of talent in this rotation. So I think we might be swinging too far in one direction to say because they didn't sign a free agent starting pitcher, one of the handful that fit this criteria that were available in this class, that this rotation isn't good enough. And I feel like that's where the seesaw gets a little wobbly and things start shaking a little bit, because I don't think those things are necessarily related.
To your point about the
Which
fact
one?
that,
I'm like 9.
yeah, and they're all great points. The point that you made about how only one team in baseball has really gone out there and done everything that its fans have hoped for and wished for this offseason, and that team being the Dodgers. Look at the top teams in baseball in terms of projected payroll right now. It's the Dodgers, obviously, number one. That's the team that has gone out there, that is the two-time defending champions, that continues to spend with reckless abandon. Then it's the Mets, the Yankees, and the Phillies. Those are three franchises right now where if you go to their fan bases, they'll all tell you that they had C+ at best off seasons. Those are three fan bases right now that are frustrated with what they have done and not done this offseason. So I think that's a salient point. And I know it's difficult to say, be happy with what you've got. The Orioles signed Pete Alonso this offseason. They are still spending more than they ever did in the final years under John Angelos. Be happy with that. I know that's frustrating for Orioles fans that just saw this team fall apart in 2025, but also understand where the Orioles are in the larger context of MLB. They're still, they still signed somebody to a 5-year, $155 million contract this winter. They still have one of the best young cores in baseball on paper. So they still have done stuff this winter as well, in addition to acquiring Shane Baz, and also understand that every team right now is kind of frustrated. Every fan base is frustrated with what their team has or hasn't done this offseason. However, I'm going to bring back a line that you wrote, John. I think it was like a year ago. I think it was when the Orioles were undergoing some of their serious pitching injuries, maybe even 18 months ago. I wrote it down and I've kept it saved for forever. And it is, what last year has shown is that the margins are too fine for this team to traffic in anything other than the highest caliber arms available. I love that line because that's what 2025 showed. It showed, and 2024 as well. It showed that you can't mess around by wishing and hoping on guys that just are not good enough, on too many question marks. Do you think the Orioles have trafficked in anything other than the highest caliber arms available?
Have they trafficked in anything other than the highest caliber arms available? I'm looking as you speak to line up how many pitchers, like controllable starting pitchers, have been traded this offseason. I see Mackenzie Gore. I'm
Freddie
scrolling.
Peralta for 1 year.
Freddie Peralta for 1 year. The Nats and I don't know what that trade is. That looks like a weird one. Doesn't really. I'm just going, vamping. Yeah, I mean, on the trade market, they pretty much did. There was a Johan Oviedo trade with the Red Sox and Pirates. That was a kind of an upside play. I think I think the answer to that question in free agency is no. I think that in terms of cost to acquire and have and kind of enjoy, Shane Baz for 3 years, the next 3 years, will be among the top 4, 5 of the pitchers who are wearing different uniforms today than they were 6 months ago, free agents and trades. And I think that's probably a reasonable thought to have. You are betting on him becoming a true, like, front half, number 2, number 1 ish starter, to say that to be the case. But you're also saying, you're also, in terms of having him at under the control he's under, you're also not precluding yourself from doing other things. If the Orioles, and again, unlimited resources is doing a lot of work and probably harm here. But the reality is, there might be a world where you sign a Framber Valdez or a Ranger Suarez, and then Kyle Bradish walks out that door in a couple of years, when Trevor Rogers walks out the door at the end of this year. That's not to say that won't happen anyways. But if you have an underwater pitching contract and you're trying to figure out the best way to allocate resources, and you don't have a quarter of what you expect to spend available to you because it's on a pitcher who's no good anymore, that's really tricky. I think this team, even as they're more willing to trade prospects, even as they're more willing to spend money, they value flexibility in a way that I hate myself saying this. I'm sitting here being like, I'm like such an idiot. I just think there's more that goes into it than that. But to answer your question, did they traffic? Shane Baz is one of the better pitchers that changed teams via free agency or trade this year, and I think that's going to be borne out. I also don't know who other than even. Okay, here we go. Now I'm just talking for talking's sake, but we're talking about the free agent pitchers that started that signed. Everyone kind of agrees that Dylan Cease is awesome. Like, has Dylan Cease had many awesome seasons?
A handful.
A handful. He's been really good. I'm going to look at it right now. But we're talking about somebody who, when he signed, everyone was basically like, this is the the nerds have won. This is a guy who had a 4.5 ERA, and his expected stats were way better. He has had very good seasons. He's had very, very good seasons. But the baseball card stats, the ERA, not there all the time. Ranger Suarez, was he ever a number 1 on the Phillies?
No.
Framber Valdez was once Justin Verlander stopped being on the Astros, and once,
and now they're on the same team.
Yeah, now they're on the same team. If the barrier to if you have to be that guy to be considered that guy, like, sure. I think there's just a little more imagination required. And I can't believe I'm saying any of this into a microphone. I kind of lost my mind.
No, I think Shane Baz, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It really is. I mean, you look at his periphery number, you look at his, back of the baseball card stats, and they're not great. It's an ERA around 4.5. It's a guy who gave up a lot of home runs. But then you look at everything that was going into last season, and the fact that he was playing in a minor league ballpark in Tampa, the fact that this was his first full season back from injury, The fact that he's still on the young side, around 26 years old, and you could look at that and say this guy could be near the top end of the rotation. And the Orioles certainly are bullish on him. I mean, the way that Craig Albernes and Mike Elias are talking about him, Craig Albernes has on our podcast, I think he said that Shane Baz has a Cy Young caliber pitcher. Maybe not this year, but at some point down the line, you have 3 cracks at it. If he's healthy for 3 seasons, he could be a Cy Young finisher, according to the Orioles. So they are certainly bullish on his talent. I still have questions about this rotation, but I also do understand that the Orioles have taken bigger swings this winter. And you look at what they did last year, and you were hoping on Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano and Kyle Gibson and Grayson Rodriguez. And those 4 guys gave you next to nothing. Grayson Rodriguez didn't pitch at all last year. Charlie Morton was a disaster for the first month and a half and then figured things out, and then you had to trade him. Tomoyuki Sugano was solid at times, terrible at other times, and he just signed with the Colorado Rockies. That doesn't expect to go well. And Kyle Gibson was unfortunately an unmitigated disaster in his final year in the big leagues. And then I look at the guys that the Orioles have this year. Shane Baz, who's coming off a season which you could say was better than the numbers will show you. You know, Zach Eflin, you re-sign him. You hope that he is closer to his old form than he is his post-injury form. You're getting a full year, hopefully, of Kyle Bradish. Mike Elias said today that they're not going to put any artificial innings limit on him. They're just going to see how he goes. Trevor Rogers is coming off a most valuable Oriole season, one of the best seasons we've seen from somebody who has pitched 109 innings in the big leagues. I feel better about that group than I did at this point last year, because I see multiple guys in there who could be number ones. Now, I'm not saying they are, but Kyle Bradish at his best is an ace. Trevor Rogers last year certainly looked like an ace. And Shane Baz, if he hits his ceiling this year or comes close to it, he could be a number 2. So I see much more talent in this group than I did in last year's group. The Orioles, I felt like last year were just kind of taking half measures. These may not be full measures, but they at least feel like 3/4 measures. I still have my questions. I still am a little bit concerned about Shane Baz. I still am not sure that all of his injury woes are behind him. I have concerns that he could be another Grayson Rodriguez. I know Grayson Rodriguez, his injury is different because it's a shoulder injury that doesn't have a set timetable. The Orioles thought several times last year he was on his road to recovery and then kept getting shut down. He hasn't pitched in a year and a half. Shane Baz is coming off a fully healthy season with 30-plus starts. But still, the injury concerns were legitimate for Shane Baz coming back from Tommy John. Were all of Shane Baz's injury issues rather ballpark related, or were there other things going on there? Is Trevor Rogers as good as he showed last year, or is he going to be closer to the Trevor Rogers that the Orioles had for the final half of the 2024 season after they got him in the trade? Are his changes legitimate? Is Zach Eflin going to be as good as he was for the first 3 starts of this past year, for the 9 starts that they got him in 2024, or is he going to be severely hampered by the back injury and the back surgery that he had? Is Kyle Bradish ready to get a full workload back in his first year after Tommy John, first full season? So I still have concerns for this rotation. I do feel better about the rotation now than I felt about last year's rotation at this point.
Yeah, and the questions that are getting asked about the 2026 rotation are mostly like, how good can this guy be? Last year it felt like is this guy going to be good enough? And those are very different questions. And the answer to even if you don't get the answer you want on some of the pitchers they have lined up for their rotation this year, you are still going to probably like the outcomes better than you liked, Charlie Morton and a 10 ERA at the turn of May. It's unpleasant to be not defending, but like I think this is like a very polarized thing. Like this rotation is not foolproof. This is not nailed on to work out. It has a better chance of working out than it did last year. I feel like that's pretty much indisputable. But there's always every team in baseball has a gap between you know, between what actually happens and the perfect scenario because you're talking about guys throwing baseballs really hard every 5 days and hoping for the best. What feels challenging is that in a way that having one top free agent starting pitcher who could be worth 2.5, 3.5, 4 wins above replacement would make the Orioles that much better, but not having them doesn't make them bad or set up to be not good. And I think
Yeah.
that's just something it doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel like there's also not really a good argument against it. That's why I've been stammering for the last 15 minutes other than I'm like kind of tired and hungry. Um there's not a
We'll
huge
stop and eat soon. Don't worry.
no, you're good. I have stuff, I have some edits to make on my column. I think that that's part of this too is that like if that is the threshold that they needed to sign a free agent starting pitcher for this offseason to be a success, um, I think I drew my line at Zach Gallen where like he was the grocery stick or he was on the right side he was the last one. He was buttoned up to the grocery stick where everything on one side is good and everything on the other side wouldn't. I think he was the last on that list. It would probably still hold. It definitely wouldn't feel like that happened, like that upgrade occurred at this point. But if that's a threshold, they have not done it. And that is, the consequences of that will be borne out over 8 months until there's somebody holding up Rob Manfred's big chunk of metal. And that's really the test of this. Like this is all well and good, but there just seems like there's like that is an inassailable argument that they did not sign top free agent starting pitcher because as we're recording this, they have not. There's still theoretically a chance to. They can make some kind of trade to get somebody better than they have. That feels unlikely based on the timing of this. Like this is what they have done. If you wanted them to sign this pitcher, that is something they have not done. It will be challenging, but not impossible for them to have a higher payroll this year than last year. And that's weird when you were talking about how much resources you have. That's not to say they won't add, payroll at the deadline and could end it higher. It's just those are all real things that are factually indisputable, but they feel like they're not as cut and dry to me. And I also feel like it's not my job to defend it. I've always thought of like what I like to do is be like, here's what they're doing, here's why. You can think what you want. Um,
Right.
we feel like I feels like the discourse broadly and also specifically on this thing is a little past that now.
Yeah. I think I fall somewhere in between you and Kyle, where you are just, this is what they're doing. It's understandable. Here's why they're doing it. And Kyle is definitely, the Orioles are not doing enough. He doesn't want, he's sick of hearing from Mike Elias. He's sick of hearing from David Rubenstein about resources. He just wants to see the proof is in the pudding. I certainly expected the Orioles to do more in the starting pitching market. I just did because when they went out and signed Pete Alonso in December, I saw the starting rotation as a bigger need than the lineup. And so I said, if they're willing to spend $155 million to get somebody for their lineup, then surely they're willing to spend that much or more to get somebody in the rotation. And they just haven't. At this point, Zach Gallen has not yet been signed by a team. Once you start to get a few weeks into spring training, Michael Elias has even acknowledged you start to get into dangerous territory. That's where we see guys sign that are not fully ready, they can't fully ramp up. Think of like Jordan Montgomery with the Diamondbacks, Blake Snell at one point with the Giants. So you got to be careful here. Something's got to give on Zach Gallen. At some point, Scott Boras has got to pull the trigger and go with the team. You could sell me on Zach Gallen. If the Orioles were to introduce him at Sarasota tomorrow or the next day as somebody who can take up a lot of innings for them, you could sell me on that because, yeah, they need quality arms, but they also need a lot of innings. They need somebody who's going to eat up 150 to 200 innings. And Zach Gallen is that guy, regardless of how bad last year how much of a downturn last year was for him. It was still a 4.83 ERA, which was lower than Shane Baz's, and he still gave you 192 innings. So the Orioles, you can't tell me the Orioles wouldn't use that guy. I just don't know if he's, the upgrade that we're talking about.
Yeah. One quick point. I know that
Please.
sounds impossible for me to make. I think everyone's thought, there are a lot of teams that spend a lot of money and spend it well. There was one that has won a couple World Series. I think the Toronto Blue Jays have incrementally supported their homegrown core with free agents. They didn't sign those free agents all at once. There was George Springer, and then there was another offseason, and then there was Kevin Gossman. If they had signed, there's a way to do what the Orioles, let me rephrase that. That is a way to do what the Orioles want to do if they want to do it. You can have multiple players making 25, 30, 35 million dollars at a time. It's probably easier to stagger them if you're going to do that, because not to say there's only room for so many, but you can only have so many. And that's not just again, this flies in the face of the unlimited resources thing. So again, they should definitely either act that way or don't. But again, the Dodgers do that and nobody else does. Teams that have a lot of resources can stagger it and do stagger it. And I think that's, I think there's a world where there could be this pitcher in this time next year, and it'll feel like, maybe it'll feel like a response to how this year went. Maybe it'll be somebody else signing them because this year goes badly. I don't know. I think there's more ways to build a team than just signing the free agent pitcher, because that is the next box to check.
Hopefully we're not sitting at home waiting a lockout or a strike to end at this point next year. That's all I'll say. On that sour note, we have so much exciting baseball coming your way. We were just at the start of spring training. The team that the Orioles do have on the field, they believe is one that can compete in the AL East. Pete Alonso certainly is bullish on this team. He's talked a million times about how excited he is. He was out there being the hype man for everybody. John, it was just great to see new, fresh energy in the form of Pete Alonso, who is in every, and I say this in the most complimentary way, a total goober out there. He's hilarious.
Yeah, he was going today. There was a set of PFPs, that like pitcher fielding drills, that he basically was the only non-pitcher who was a part of, instead of it being like pitchers were working on like covering first. And it was only Pete Alonso. There were 3 groups of like 7, 8 guys, 15 minutes apiece, just fungo, go. Pete Alonso was taking every single rep. He was doing commentary as he was doing it. He was yelling at himself. He was encouraging the pitchers. He was very encouraging, probably more encouraging to the younger guys, like the rookies, than the guys who he would have ever seen or laid eyes on before or knew the names of, presumably. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that he took like over 100. Like he did, like he was going and going and going. He was dripping sweat at the end of it. It wasn't done for show, I don't think, but everyone noticed. He just kept going. And that's not to say, I don't know that that's how he's going to be every day. I don't know that would be available to him every day, but it was very interesting to see, that kind of example set. I'll say that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And to hear him complimenting the pitchers that he was watching during some of the live batting practice that the Orioles were doing at the stadium at Ed Smith Stadium. I mean, he got struck out by Dean Kramer on a splitter, walking away, calling it a nasty pitch. He's saying, good crap, Dean. He's firing up the guys that are facing him. Really just a funny guy.
When they turned it over, so Shane Baz did the second inning of that live session, and Pete Alonso very emphatically and profanely let everyone know all the reasons why he did not want to face Shane Baz. He said at the Birdland Caravan event at the Center Theater that it was the toughest at bat he had all of last year. And he let everyone, Orioles, Craig Albertaz, Donnie Ecker, Dustin Land, all the players around him. He let everyone know exactly what he thought about Shane Baz's stuff and what the perspective of a hitter is when you're in the box.
Yeah, and he, as soon as Dean got off the mound, he announced the pitch of the day, splitter.
Yeah.
He's entertaining. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. We're keeping you updated on the BaltimoreBanner.com or thebanner.com. Both take you to the same place. $1 for 6 months. Andy Kuska's writing great stuff as well. We'll try to have another podcast for you at some point soon. Hopefully our internet connection is better. Maybe we just do it from home, whatever it is. But
I'm
we'll
not
keep you
doing this one
updated.
again, though. I'll tell you that much.
We're not doing this podcast a third time, so we hope you enjoyed it. Like, rate, review, subscribe, write us a 5-star review, and I'll read it out here on the show. Thanks so much for tuning in.